Hello, scholars. We are gonna review some basics and like necessary reminders for introductions and conclusions for your STAAR essays. So at this point, you should have already written your body paragraphs, and I'm gonna explain like why we did it that way. So it is kind of weird to like write the beginning of your paper when you've already written the middle and at the end of the writing process. It's all kind of mixed up. It feels like, and it sounds like a paradox, right? Like why would I write the beginning at the end? But what you're doing here is you've already like made the meat of your, let's like use this burger metaphor, and it can be a bean burger if for you vegans out there. Um, but the introduction and the conclusion are like the buns, right? Like we're gonna wrap it up. We're gonna put it all in one package, and we're gonna put it on the top and put it on the bottoms. Like that's the best way I can think about it. But before you write something, like before you even wrote your body paragraphs, you sort of imagine whether this is clear in your mind or kind of blurry. You imagine what your paper is going to look like, what it's going to include in it. But when you already have the main points of your paper written down, when you have the body paragraphs fleshed out and you have the ideas and evidence already there, you know what's to come in your paper. And then you can go back to the beginning and do a better job introducing it and giving an overview of what you've already written. And then by the end, you just want to connect it all in your conclusion. So, three things for both your intro and conclusion that I'm looking for, and that you need next week when you write this essay. You need in your intro the hook, the overview of the topic, and the thesis statement. These are three different things. They should not sound and look the same and just like the same repetitive sentence over and over again. They function differently. And then your conclusion needs to restate, but not repeat. You're not copying and pasting that thesis. You're rephrasing it, same ideas with different words. And that'll lead you into connecting all of your evidence. So the evidence that you used in your first body paragraph and then the evidence in the second. You want to see what the relationship is between all the pieces of evidence that you brought up. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a little bit if that's like, what? I've never done that before. And then by the end, you need a call to action. So last year you wrote expository essays on the STAAR. This year you're writing persuasive. We want to end a persuasive essay giving our audience something to do, a task, an action item. So let's talk about intros for a second, and then I'll move into conclusions. So this was me when I started writing my introduction, and I know all of us have probably had this experience, like writing a paper and you just sit there and your head is empty. So I was sitting here in the notes section of my phone trying to write my introduction for like 20 minutes with just the word community, and it was like that cursor was blinking in front of me, taunting me. And I was just sitting there waiting for ideas to come to me, but I know that that's not how ideas work. They don't just show up. You sort of have to summon them or seek them out. So then I wrote down in my notes section, I asked myself, what do I want my audience, which is you guys, you're reading my paper, to know about community? And then I immediately started being able to write my introduction. I had like more direction, and I think I wrote it in like 5 minutes after that. Luckily, I already had my thesis, so that was nice. So here's my introduction, and what I really just want to point out here is that the hook, there's a couple things I want to point out. Mostly in the hook, that I'm not like using a formula for the hook that I might have used before. I'm really thinking about like what is going to grab my audience's attention truly. Like what would grab my attention when I'm reading this, and how can I then think about how that would grab other people's attention. I don't know how to say that better. For me, this was like challenging people from the very first sentence, and sort of like being really assertive in my tone from the first sentence. So I said, I think people get their definitions of rights and privileges mixed up too much. So hopefully that like cues my audience in to be like, well, what do you mean? Do I get my definition of rights and privileges mixed up? I think a challenge is a good way to start. You can start with a simile, you can start with a metaphor. There's a lot of like clever ways to start the hook, and this is probably like the most creative you can get in the paper. So yeah, I'm excited to see what you guys come up with for hooks. Then you want to overview your topic. Just give like a general, what your general opinion is about, for you guys, it'll be like war. like the subject of war. What comes to mind for you? What definitions do you have? What information do we need to have context for the rest of your paper? So make sure that you're not just jumping straight into your thesis statement, which is the last thing that should happen in this paragraph, in your introduction paragraph. And then conclusions. The guiding question for me with conclusions was, how can I end my paper with purpose and tie it all together? So I want my last paragraph to be purposeful, not just like me trying to get to the end of my paper and sort of summarizing everything I've already said and wasting that space that I have in the STAAR test. Because it's like, you don't get a ton of space to write this whole thing. It's a pretty short essay. So the goal of your conclusion is to meld all your ideas together and then lead your reader to take action, just like we said earlier. So I'm going to show you my call to action in a second, but first I want to point out 3 things I want to point out here. That I'm restating my thesis. This is worded differently, and it has a slightly different meaning, but it has the same reasons as my original thesis. So I'm not just copying and pasting. Where is my thesis? I guess in the last slide. I'm not just copying and pasting this sentence in blue, green, teal. I am rewording it so that I can sort of lots of re's here, restating, reordering, re-emphasizing my thesis. And then in the middle, I'm connecting my 2 pieces of evidence. So I bring up the American healthcare system, and then I also, in the second paragraph, bring up Bell Hooks, the book All About Love. And I want to find the connection between those 2 things in my conclusions. So the question you could ask here is, what is the relationship, or what is the connection between my 2 pieces of evidence that I used? And then by the end, give your reader something to do. So for you guys, if you're reading this, I kind of give you like 3 things to do in my call to action. Because I say that the road to harmony is going to require us to organize, to leave behind our ego, to forget our ego, and then embrace humanity as a more collective family. So yeah, you actually get 3 calls to action in the end of my paper. And feel free to like talk to your audience really directly in your conclusion as well. So something I've already seen in hooks from other classes, hold up, let me make this easier to see, is that a lot of people are just jumping into the main ideas of their paper and like sort of just giving their thesis from the beginning. Hooks are just like a taste of what's to come, right? They're supposed to get me interested. They're not supposed to really like give me super heavy ideas from the very first sentence. So don't give away all your ideas from the very beginning. Back up, give us context, give us background, give us an overview of the topic that we need in order to understand the point that you're trying to make. Okay. So that is it for intros and conclusions. You have all these slides as reminders for the pieces that you need. And if you have any questions, then I'll be available all of Wednesday, and then I'll be back on Monday. But pay attention to subplans coming Thursday and Friday, and we're submitting this paper by the end of the day on Friday, so use your time super wisely. All right, thank you for watching, subscribe, and like.